It's just so much fun. I think in a year of ups and downs, this is definitely a highlight for me and a treat to be on this panel and moderating such brilliant minds on a very, very important issue, which is families, communities, and leveraging their expertise and their voice in educational change process. So we have some questions, but we, like Tracie said, we want to invite you guys to raise questions and comments and make this as participatory as possible for you. But I want to start off with a general question that our panelists know a lot about and have some thoughts about. Because as you know, in this field of education, we struggle to meaningfully engage families in these transformative relationships that we want, in collaborations that are mutually beneficial. So I want to ask each of them to think about, what does an equitable partnership with families look like in local communities and schools and in school districts? And why is this work important to them?
I guess I can go first. We didn't really think of the order. So hi, everyone. It's so nice to have you all joining us today. And, you know, it's so fun for me to be able to be with this amazing group of panelists and to have Rhoda facilitating the conversation. So I think I agree with you, Rhoda. This is, it's a highlight for me too. So when I think about your question, you know, what does an equitable partnership with families look like in schools? I think that that's a central point of this conference. And one of the things that I really love about the theme for this conference on organizing dispositions, I think for me, it means that we're trying to unlearn what we know or what we think we know. And so I can talk about a few different things that I feel are important for kind of unlearning and relearning when we think about an equitable partnership with families. You know, one is that we traditionally, when we think about our partnership with families or our work with families in schools, we're often thinking about, you know, what do schools need? What do schools want? When do they want parents and caregivers to be there? And, you know, the kinds of programs and activities and what the way we define and think about partnership is often centered around like the needs and wants of a school. And, you know, and I think that that has caused a lot of problems for us. And so I think unlearning that and kind of moving to a model that is a lot more family and community centered, that so that, you know, oftentimes people ask me, what do you think good family engagement or partnership in schools should look like? And I think that they shouldn't all look the same, because our families and communities are unique and they have rich histories. And so I think that the way we handle our partnership with families and schools and districts has to be centered on their experiences. You know, I also think that oftentimes we're focused on activities and programs and events, and we lose sight of the fact that what we really should be thinking about when we think about equitable partnership is knowing and understanding each other. And we get to that through cultivating relationships and trying to build a sense of trust. So I think that that has to be at the center of all the kinds of things that we try to do in schools and in districts. And then, you know, I also think that we tend to focus on these transactional interactions. So, you know, like, I want you to do this, and then we'll get improvements for your child in reading or in math. Or, you know, you do this for me and I'll do this for you. And I think that we have to really move away from kind of that transactional way of thinking about the interactions and relationships, and to think about partnership as more transformational relationships. And then, you know, I think it's important, Rhoda, because you asked us about how does this become equitable partnership? And I think that means that we have to reckon with the fact that we have to share power. You know, I sat through a couple nights ago, the Boston School Committee had a pretty long school committee meeting. It lasted 8 or 9 hours. They were trying to decide on the new process for enrolling students in their selective admissions exam schools. And I spent probably 6 of the hours tuned in, and I spent a lot of it disappointed. There were, one of the things that was really beautiful to see were that there were immigrant, Asian American immigrant families that tuned in and wanted to share during the public comment period. um, and I had assumed that, we had interpreters there so that we could understand what they were sharing when they made their 2-minute testimony. And I had assumed that they were also getting interpretation to have the whole meeting translated to them. And it became clear about a couple hours into the testimony because one of the parents said, this is my story, but I just want to let you know, I've been listening, I've been present, but I don't understand anything that's been said. And I realized at that moment that there was no care around interpretation for the families that were joining, even though we had an interpreter who was providing language interpretation from that language into English. They weren't providing simultaneous interpretation so that families could really be present and be part of the conversation. And I think that's an example of how we think that we're building a partnership and we're giving space and voice for families to, be part of the conversation in schools and districts, but we really just don't get it because we're not trying to make it equitable. We're not trying to share power. We're kind of, doing these symbols around partnership without really understanding that we have to reckon with sharing power.
Thank you for that. I like this notion of symbolism around partnership. And I wonder if Anne and Luva have some comments to build on what Sue has shared.
You go, Luva.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Rhoda. For me, as a parent leader here in Rochester, New York, or just what I think needs to, I think Sue just kind of touched upon it, is about making sure that the families that are in your space or in your building, you really understand where they come from and what their culture is and what their backgrounds are. I think that is really highly important in establishing equitable opportunities when you really sit back and you get to understand the families and what their needs are and where they come from, because every family is different. Every family's background is different. Everybody's family's culture is different. And when we don't really step aside to really understand that, then that's where the issue lies, where there's all these inequities going on, because we really don't take that time to really understand those families and what they are used to, accustomed to doing on the norm. And that's just really important. And when we begin to do that, then you break down those layers and then you create those relationships, the positive relationships that you need to move forward.
Thanks, Luva. So I just would echo a lot of what Sue and Luva said. We, in organizing, think a lot about relationships, about leadership, and about power. And I think if we were to actually see equitable partnerships, one, we wouldn't be talking about family engagement. Those of you who know me know that I don't actually like to associate myself with family engagement because of the way that gets marginalized in our systems and gets taken up in exactly the kinds of ways that Sue is talking about. And I think that we would be seeing like ownership, that we would actually, just kind of referring back to the panel last night, is a recognition that schools belong to communities, and that we would be seeing not just one or two parents or community-based organizations, but across all the levels in our system. We would have families, young people, community members who are part of the key decisions that are happening all up and down our systems, whether it's happening within a given classroom, and we're thinking about, what are we going to prioritize, and all the way up to systems levels when we're trying to make decisions about going back to school, that it wouldn't be just the folks who are paid in their paid positions sitting in their office trying to decide what might be best. We would actually have parents and families and communities, especially those who have been most impacted by educational injustice, who are actually shaping the conversation. and who have influence. So all the time we have these structures of things like listening sessions and task force and committees, and those folks put in a ton of time and bring a lot of expertise to the table. And then it gets left sitting there, and people go away frustrated sometimes that their insights and their lived experiences and their expertise aren't being taken up. We often tend to consolidate the power through those kinds of rituals. And then our systems haven't changed or shifted in the ways that we need them to. So I think that we would really see some fundamental shifts in terms of whose voices are centered, whose voices are heard, and then how those decisions actually play out, who's actually shaping those decisions, and recognizing and being explicit about the fact that often our systems are centering particularly privileged professional white voices and parents in those decisions. We often don't say that and are not explicit about that. And so if we actually want to change anything, we would need to shift whose voices are being centered and who we're listening to and how we're making those decisions.
I mean, this is just a little bit of an insight into how much deep expertise the three of them have in this space, because everything they said really resonates with me as a person who's learns from their work. And so I want to shift a little bit, because I think what would really be beneficial to participants is leaving with some concrete strategies and ideas about how to play out some of the things you just mentioned, some of the challenges that you just highlighted in their actual work. Like, so I'm wondering if Sue, you can talk about some of your recent scholarship. You really speak to allyship that can develop between teachers and families who are seeking educational justice in schools. And I'm wondering if you can share some insights from your book, Natural Allies, that would be lessons for the audience to think about how the notion of organizing dispositions could actually shape their work.
Yeah, I really love that question. And I spent some time thinking about it and thinking about the framing of this conference. And in some ways, it kind of goes back to that original point I was making about, the importance of unlearning. And I think one of the things that this conference space is trying to promote is this idea, this question about, who is a leader and who do educational leaders learn from? And so, that question around who is a leader, I think we really have to debunk this myth that, that we identify leaders because they're in certain positions of leadership. And, and I think it's important for us to think about leadership as a way of engaging. And it's in some ways like my first work into the field of education was as a teacher. And, I also think it's in some ways a pedagogical exercise in many of the ways that teaching is more explicitly. So, I think that teachers themselves can be people who in our field lead with justice, and every teacher in Natural Allies also sees parents as leaders too. And they see parents as leaders because they see parents as people who teach them how to work with this child, their student. They support their own learning, like the teacher's own learning and understanding about the experiences of families and communities. And I think that we would all agree that leaders need to be informed, so they need knowledge and understanding. And in a school community, I don't think you can lead with justice if you don't have knowledge about families and an understanding about their experience. So, and I think because teachers are so close to the day-to-day experiences of families, they have that regular contact potentially with families. I think that any, traditionally identified leader like a superintendent or a principal must be asked to learn from the teachers and families in their community. And, oftentimes we kind of, when we think about it in a traditional way, we think that they're, through their leadership, they're bestowing kind of guidance and support and knowledge to teachers and families. And I really think that we have to disrupt the movement of, who learns and who teaches. And I think so, they're asking questions like, how can you teach me what I need to know and understand about families to lead with justice and dignity? The other thing that I would say in terms of organizing dispositions for educational leadership, there was a guiding and central kind of requirement or tenet of all the teachers in Natural Allies. And, to be perfectly honest, when I was choosing 5 teachers who were going to be part of this project, it was the most important element of their partnership with families, that they have ideas about relational trust, shared leadership, that are rooted in this reality of the systemic racism within schools. And so the teachers in Natural Allies, they blaze the path of their work with parents with this unapologetic commitment to anti-racism. So what does that mean? So the white teachers in the book know that they have an uphill battle ahead of them in terms of building trust with BIPOC families, and they're okay with that. They know that they have to put in the time to build the trust because they understand that they work in a racist system where people who look like them have harmed families, neglected families, and these families need evidence to see that they're trustworthy. And their credentials or the newsletters that they write or the welcome signs that they have, don't mean anything without that trust. And then similarly, the teachers of color, featured in Natural Allies, bring their own powerful narratives as immigrants, for example, learning to navigate schools with their families, naming the prejudice and the silent assumptions that kind of surrounded their experience with educators, the blatant racism towards their families, and they wanted to demand a sense of justice in how schools engage with them. So I think central to any conversation about leadership and organizing dispositions, has to be named around this commitment to anti-racism. And really it's because we can all build relationships or say that we want to, but we can also do it poorly or in ways that cause harm. We can build relations selectively and we can do it thoughtlessly. And I think that one of the things that organizing teaches us is that relationships are at the core of all of our transformational efforts. But we also need to know that we have to cultivate leadership and we have to build power. These are really important things that we learn from Anne's work as well. So these are things that school leaders, say that they know how to do, but I think it matters how we enter into this work. So I think the focus on organizing as a central theme to this conference and our thinking about leadership can, really be so transformational.
Thank you. So I wonder if Luva could share, just a parent's perspective on her work. I mean, she's a parent organizer, a community organizer. I think she would describe herself as this. But what do you think the families and communities need in order to be supported as educational leaders in the same way that Sue was talking about, or the framing for this conference leads us to believe that not just positional leaders or folks with formal titles are leaders. What do you think from your work, what do you see and what do parents need?
I think one of the things that as a parent, that parents want to be heard. They want to be heard and they want to have the opportunities to be heard. As we all know, parents are the first teachers, right? We are teachers to our children. And I think that what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that the parent voice is not being recognized enough. And they want to be heard. They want to be able to sit down in a space and be able to exchange ideas with an educator and be able to come up with some strategies to have success with their child in the school system. And that's just not what's happening. And so therein lies, you hear many parents frustrated they're feeling like they're not being valued, their voice is not being valued. And then sometimes it seems like it's even more frustration for the Black and brown families because there's a lack of understanding our culture and where we're from and what we do and how we raise our children and how we talk. It's just so many different things. And so as a result of that, you just parents are frustrated and they want to be heard. They want to have a time to be listened to. And that's just not happening enough and not taken really seriously. It feels by educators at times, and as a result, you have that those walls put up where you come into a space with educators and you feel it in the room, right? Because you feel like, oh, this parent's gonna say something negative about me as an educator, and this educator is gonna say something negative about me and my child, and you can feel that in this space. And I think that if we as educators or educators and parents begin to really come to a space together and really just like think about why we're really here. We're here for the children, our children, right? That's the number one common denominator in this whole space, right? It's about our children and what's best. But it's not going to be done that way if we're only listening to those who are educators and who have the degrees or who have those titles, because the parents are the ones we don't have the titles, but we are the first teachers and we know our kids best.
Yes. And to me, this is a perfect segue to Anne's work because I don't know if you guys noticed, I'm shamelessly plugging their books because I really do want people to buy them and read them, because I think even though there's deep scholarship there, they are accessible to practitioners. And so I want to thank both of Sue and Anne for writing these books, and actually remember running to Anne at a conference back when we could do conferences in a hotel lobby, and she said, "Oh, I'm writing a book," and here we have it. So I want to know if Anne could talk about her scholarship, because I think she deals with the complexities of family and community and school collaborations really well, kind of laying out these different levels. So what Luva just mentioned about these micro interactions, she talks about that. She talks about systems level interactions. She talks about societal level interactions. And so as I'm teaching a class this fall for aspiring superintendents and educational leaders who view this as very daunting, to take all of this on. But they want to do it. They just need supports around that. And so I wonder if Anne can speak to this right now. What supports do educators and administrators need to advance the more racially just collaborations that you talk about in Just Schools?
Thanks, Rhoda. Yeah, I think, I just want to start at that kind of micro level that Luva was talking about. And just kind of say, like all of these levels are connected to each other. So when we have an individual interaction between a parent of color and an educator who 85% of whom are white, that we're playing out particular dynamics that are microcosm of what's happening on the broader society, at the level of systems, all of these kinds of things. So like when Luva was saying, like you walk into the room and you feel these tensions, there's a whole history that's playing out in that space. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot has talked about that. The people are bringing these histories in with them, and we have community level and historical contexts that are shaping those dynamics. So really for the systems-based actors, really actually being able to understand and name and hold those histories to a certain extent. So if a parent of like a Black parent is angry and upset, recognizing one, this isn't about me individually and getting all upset because what did I do? Like you come in here, you're all upset already. Well, it's like, well, you know what? They're often, this is time and time again they've had to come in and have a certain kind of conversation about their own child. Maybe they have their own experiences as a parent having to then growing up in a system, and then we're talking about this is not just them, it's their niece, their neighbor, their grandfather, We're talking about these kinds of things that now, and then we're talking about racism and oppression and hundreds of years of that. So it's for the educators to recognize that all that stuff is playing out in these individual interactions. It's in the room. We may not be able to name all of those kind of things, but these tensions aren't just about what each of us as sort of independent individuals. Yes, we are individuals, and we are part of these broader histories and dynamics in society. So for these educators to understand, not only understand that, but to actually, especially if you are in a position, even if you're, wherever you are in that system, whether you're a superintendent or you're a teacher, being able to show up with some humility, to think about how you show up in that space, to bring your full self into that space, to be able to name some of those tensions, and to be ready to lean into those. When Luva says, parents want to be heard, we have a very time-oriented set of expectations, a sense of urgency. One of the panelists last night was kind of talking about the dynamics of white supremacy culture. We have also a very kind of technical approach to meeting and engaging with families. So it's like, I have this outcome I want to have by this particular point in time, and as soon as the parents put something on the table, I'm going to snap it to all of these different categories I have in my head. And or even if we're talking about it at a systems level, I might automatically think, okay, that goes in the social emotional learning curriculum category. Okay, I'm going to make them go talk to this person over here and make sure they get this curriculum. And we're in such a rush all of the time. And so some of it is just to say, like, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's be human beings. Let's be our full selves. Let's name and understand that these are complex interactions that are happening. And, I think a lot of times for folks, they're like, oh man, I got a lot of parents to get through, or I have so many things to get through. But just think about how often we rush to these things, then we end up having to, on the back end, then people get angry enough that they organize. And then we've got all these other things that we're then trying to sort of manage. If we could actually slow ourselves down a little bit in just that moment and really listen and be present and enter that conversation with some humility, then we actually can learn and take something up differently. So that's a kind of micro level. I think Rhoda was shouting out the book. Thank you for that. There's lots of examples in there. For example, like we hire family liaisons all the time, and we set them up such that the conditions and expectations of their work are to assimilate parents, to do what the school wants them to do, to get their kid to school on time, to be a regular attendance, to turn in their homework, to behave the way that teachers expect them to behave. And instead, if we could create a role for these family liaisons and expectations that their job is actually to reach out to families and to support them and to help develop their leadership and agency, to be able to influence and shift things at the different levels that they're at to make change. And so that we can actually, as formal leaders, really see their expertise and learn from it. So to really take on a kind of pedagogical leadership that I think Sue is pointing to. We also spend hours and hours in professional development, right? As formal educators. What happens when we actually use those as opportunities to learn from the people in our systems and the folks who are closest to the injustices that are rolled out in our systems? So those are just a couple of things, is to think about, like, how do we create routines where we're actually learning? How do we reorient the kinds of roles and positions we already have in our systems towards more justice-centered aims?
Yes. So a couple of people, someone asked about the title of the books, and I see that they were responded to in the chat, and Natural Allies by Soo Hong and Just Schools by Ishimaru. So thank you to my friends from Raise Your Hand, Illinois, for typing the names to the chat. But there's some questions that have come forward. I have some more questions too, but I want to engage the audience questions, in particular this first one about building partnerships and thinking of rebuilding. And I think they're talking about Rochester School District. Is that what RCSD is? I'm not sure. Okay. What about rebuilding from the ground up? And I think this question is particularly important this year in a global pandemic where we've centered families in a way that we haven't centered families, or at least they're part of the conversation. I don't, in practice, it varies by community, well, how much we're centering actually the perspective of families and community. But this question says, we all know it's broken. Instead of repair, we could be focusing on rebirth. So what would a school look like if parents were welcome and part of the solutions? I think you guys touched on this a little bit in the first question, but I wonder if you have thoughts about this social dreaming exercise from this participant, because I want us to end on a happy note at some point in this call.
Oh, so you're asking us, Rhoda?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh,
This is a question from the audience, and so I wanted to. They wanted your thoughts on this.
In regards to Rochester, New York, I'm not sure if many are familiar with Rochester, New York. We have one of the poorest. Within the city, there's one of the richest school district and one of the poorest school district, right within 10 minutes away from each other. It's mind-boggling. It's just like amazing how that is, but it is happening. And within the school areas, we have one of the top 5 school districts there, and that school district is failing tremendously. It's failing in so many areas that is beyond comprehension on how it is happening. And many parents, many people in the community just feel like it needs to be restructured. It needs a new rebirth. There needs to be a newer everything, new thoughts, new ideas. What you're seeing is that a lot of the same people from 20, 25 years ago are still running the same system, the same way, and haven't really evolved at all. And as a result, children are the ones that are getting the brunt of this, right? And what that means is that kids are not passing, and there's low graduation rates. Poverty is continuously high. The teacher turnover is as high as heck as you could think of. But the children are being failed at this time, and people are frustrated. And I think for that particular district, a rebirth would be welcome. And what needs to be welcome is, again, I keep saying it, the parent voice and building relationships with parents. That district does not have a great, I don't want to say a great sense, but they just don't have a great, it appears they don't have a great connection with parents. And as a result, you see a lot of frustrated parents, more than what you would want to see in a big school district as that. And what's happening is a lack of transparency. And I know for me as a parent, that's something that I really rely on. Like, I know that school districts have different things that they need to maybe keep to themselves, whether it's dealing with the law, whether it's dealing with whatever it is, but simple things are not being transparent here in this school particular district. And as a result, it's frustrating. This district is in a deficit of $200 million, and this has been happening for years. And parents are trying to figure out now, because what happened is that this pandemic has really slowed parents down to really see the bigger picture that's happening within that school district. Like, they saw it before, but now they really see it, because now you're at home, you're remote learning, you're doing all these things, and you're like asking all the questions that you probably didn't have time before, because we were just going. And so again, I bring it back to perspective. Like, it would be a beautiful thing that when they're doing reopening of schools, that parents are sitting at the table. When they're talking about the special education system, parents are at that table. Like, every stakeholder that's needed should be there, and that should be included with parents, and that's just is not happening. And that is so frustrating. As a parent, my kid is not particularly in that district, but the parents that I lead in within the Greater Rochester POTI who attend that school district are frustrated. And it's frustrating for me to see that, because you want to fix it for them, you want to try to help them, but like there's literally no answers, because you need to just be structured. They need to just fix the whole thing all over again and start from scratch, to now incorporate families and really have that sense of belonging into a school. And to answer, so I know I don't want to keep off I could be on this topic all day, but if I were to go into school and I saw an ideal school that had families engaged and teachers are engaged, and there's some relationships going on, that school would have thriving kids. The kids will be thriving. You know why? Because everybody's working together for the love of children, right? And not saying that people will be perfect and we're not going to have disagreements and things like that, but if a school is really functioning and has all stakeholders involved and really value and honor those voices, some of the things that you see and hear would just not be occurring, because everybody would be understanding each other and really get it. And they'll be working towards a common goal, which is for the children.
Yes, Luva. Every time she talks. Yes, and I want to point out that I forgot that to shout out Luva's report on the ripple effects, and thank you to Joanna Geller for actually posting the link in the chat. She's a co-author of The Ripple Effect in Action, What 7 Parent Leadership Organizations Learned from Participatory Evaluation. And I think this is an important piece for the participants. But we have a lot more questions, and a couple of them, and I want to give Sue and Ann an opportunity to weigh in on some of these questions. As related to Luva's comment about COVID-19 and the pandemic, there have been 2 questions about this. Whether or not you're seeing real family inclusion during COVID-19. They are saying that they feel like parents are running into a wall constantly around this and interacting with the school district. And relatedly, they want to ask, another person asked, how can we help family engagement specialists, organizers fight this fatigue in the midst of COVID-19? It was demanding work before the pandemic. Obviously, it's amplified right now. So any thoughts that any of the presenters have on this?
Well, I guess I kind of want to, one, acknowledge, like, wow, what a hard, exhausting time this is for everyone. And especially like all the demands that have been heaped on schools, and what schools, suddenly we're like, oh yeah, schools are feeding kids. Schools are, they're providing internet access. They're providing technology. They're having to help students deal with issues of homelessness. It's just like all of these things that, I think many of us have known that schools have played these roles, but it kind of brought it into the public eye much more. And it's increased the demand for the folks who are really trying to support families in these kinds of things. So I would say, so one, just acknowledging that, and that I think the other thing though is that this is the moment when we also need to really think about what does it look like to have other agencies and community-based organizations, other organizations step up to the plate. And what does it mean to also resource that? So there are already a lot of community-based organizations in our region that have stepped up, but they're doing it by shifting their programming on already shoestring budgets. So I want to emphasize the importance of resources right now and how we are choosing to use our resources. We had an opportunity, I'd like to think we still have one, to do the kind of thing that Luva's talking about, where it isn't about like, let's tweak this around the edges, let's try to do a little patchwork here and there, but we can actually do something different, something really different. And the places where I see that, the potential for that to emerge, frankly, is happening outside of formal systems. So like recently I had the privilege of getting to, we wrote something for the local paper, a group of parent leaders and I did. And, it became clear to me that there are all kinds of things that are happening that systems don't even see. So there are, like, for instance, there's a Somali community that's in our region, and many of them are actually getting supports from Somalia, from teachers in Somalia. So they're getting language supports, but then also help with math and things like that. And there's a group of families that are doing that together. There's a network of African American moms in our region who are also working together. And what they're doing is there's also some community-based like after school providers. They're really providing the kind of culturally responsive education that parents and young people have been demanding all along. And so if we can figure out how our formal systems can take up and support and partner with those efforts, I think that there's some real potential to try something different, to really reimagine how we go about schooling. But so long as we are continuing to funnel resources and energy into the same old things that we've done, we're going to feel like, oh, we don't have the resources for those kinds of things. We don't have the bandwidth for doing something different. Well, it's because we actually have to shift how we're using those resources. And we've got a lot of funders out there right now who are starting to rethink how they're going about their funding. And maybe they should actually be doing the same thing and listening to families and communities about what needs to happen and how we might shift that and in some really fundamental ways.
Yes. So we have another question, and I wonder if Sue might be willing to weigh in on it. It's related to teacher education and leadership preparation programs. And the work, and let me make sure I don't misquote this person's question as I go scrolling through. But I feel as if you probably thought about this a little bit. And I wanted to give you space and time to think about the role of teacher education programs or school leadership programs in guiding this conversation around social justice issues at schools, and relatedly, the kind of the engagement of families in these spaces.
I'm thankful for that question because it was definitely a question that I had as I was writing Natural Allies, because one of the things that I heard again and again from the 5 teachers that I got to know in that project was that they didn't have any experience or support thinking about engaging families as they were going through their teacher education programs. And so, I kind of think that when you don't address something in your professional training or your teacher education, then as teachers, we kind of fall back on what we know and what feels familiar. And, Dan Lordy talks about this, and he calls this he's a historian of education. He talks about the apprenticeship of observation. So he says that, even a new teacher has thousands and thousands of hours of observing teaching because they have gone through school. And, one of the things that young people do is they watch their teachers. They see what they're doing. And so if you have an absence or a void in your teacher education program around engaging families, then my guess is, well, what will you do? I think you'll probably just fall back on those kinds of things that you experienced growing up. The parent-teacher conferences, the back to school nights, the PTOs and PTAs, and you'll kind of think that's how we connect with families. That's what families want. And and I think that's a real lost opportunity, and it's a shame. I think that if we want to create educators who are thinking about culturally sustaining practices, then we can't just focus on what they're doing in the classroom and what they're doing instructionally and separate that from the young people's families. So one of the things I think that the pandemic, I worry about what the pandemic is teaching us, because I know how entrenched our systems are in schools. And so I know that we are paying a lot of lip service to connecting with and communicating with families now, because especially if you're doing remote learning, you need to provide them with the hotspot and the Chromebook and you know that kids are going to be connecting at home. And so you need families to kind of help you implement that and make that happen. But, I think that we should have recognized all along that when you teach 29 kids in your 5th grade classroom, you look at those 29 kids and you see their siblings and you see their parents and you see their families and their family history. Like those kids, even though they're the ones in your classroom, they carry all of those lived experiences of their families and communities into the classroom with them. And that's why it's so important, like when Luva says that parents want to be heard. Those young people, I mean, Rhoda, this was a question you kind of posed to us when we were planning. It's like, what does this mean for kids? Kids are, children are watching. What's at stake for kids? Well, they're watching us all the time. And if we pretend that loving our children is just about kind of meeting what we think are their needs in the classroom, but we put a blind eye or just completely fail to recognize or love or inquire about or try to build connection with their families, there's deep messages that we're communicating to young people about that. And so, I think that one of the things that I hope we learn from this pandemic is that young people have always carried their families and their community lives into the classroom with them. And it's not just because they're connecting in the living room on a Chromebook that was issued by the school and hotspot that was provided. It's because we have an absolute responsibility to consistently know them in that kind of full way. And we haven't done a good job of doing that. I hope that the pandemic is kind of teaching us to shift our minds, but I actually wonder if it's just teaching us to modify our practices. And so that's one of the things that I worry about, because the shifts in mindset, I think, are incredibly important. And a lot of teachers just don't think about families as in a leading role. When they think about leading with justice in a school, they're not accustomed to thinking about families playing that role. And I think a lot of that it stems from, our racism, our deficit view of families. Like, I think every day, if you want to be an anti-racist educator, you have to ask yourself the question, what am I doing, to dismantle this system of racism that has broken and caused us to need to heal our schools? Like, every day we have to ask that question. And when we interact with our families, every time we have to look at those families and think, like, what am I bringing to this relationship that may represent harm and that may represent injury? Like, what do I need to do to kind of reckon with the healing that has to happen, in this space?
And Rhoda, real quick, I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject that I often wonder as a parent, looking in, and watching teachers, because I love teachers. Like, I love what they do. I feel like they're like the second thing to our children. They second parents, right? They are with our children for 6.5 hours a day or 7 hours a day, depending on your school and your school district. But I often wonder about the background of teaching and how they're being taught. Are they being taught really like some really hands-on skills about really connecting with people? Or they're just being taught a lot of theory, right? Like, just get your book, read your book, you learn your book, you learn, you have to do 2 + 2 is 4. But like, I'm hoping, and as colleges are starting to, with this pandemic, is probably trying to revisit and do the Zoom world of how to build community. I'm hoping that we can find ways to really teach incoming teachers from day one, when they say they want to be a teacher, these skills that allow them, because some of these skills come naturally. Like, I'm a natural extrovert, so it comes to me naturally to really engage with a family member and talk with a parent and get to know them. And for others, it might be a struggle, right? Because they just don't, that's not their thing. But they still want to be, it doesn't mean they're a bad teacher. It just means that they don't have that skill right there. So I'm wondering if somehow, when people become teachers or go in that profession and they go through the classes of theory, can they get those skills in there? Can they be taught those skills so that they can, when they come out and they go into the real world, or maybe have more practicums, where they are really being engaged with students, right? From day one, maybe if they do 30 hours, maybe they do 50 hours more, right? Because now then they get to see a different variety. And I know they get the opportunity to come in and teach and help teach with a teacher, but I feel like it needs more responsibility to really to understand the different cultures and different families that's in the space when they're going to now become a teacher, so that when they do become a teacher, it's like, oh, I got this, I got it, kind of thing.
I love what you just said. Oh, sorry, Sue, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, add and respond to Luva. Luva, I think that you should be teaching
Yes.
your teachers. And I say that in all seriousness because, oftentimes teachers learn from researchers. They learn from people like me and Anne and Rhoda, and we offer, research and practice for them to learn. I don't think there are many teachers who are learning about how to engage families. So like around this question about connecting with families, I think that we kind of ignore that. A lot of the teachers in my book said, nobody ever taught me how to do this. And, that was one of the big questions I had after I finished the book. And it led me to do my current project now, which is like a study of pre-service teachers. So people who are studying to become teachers, because I'm curious about, what are you thinking? What are your fears and uncertainties when it comes to, engaging with families? And I'm learning they have a lot of them. They believe it's really important to connect with their students' families, but they're very puzzled because no one really teaches them how to do this work. And so, in all seriousness, I feel like, as part of a teacher education program, like our teacher should learn from people like you, Luva. Like their first conversation with a parent shouldn't be during their first year as a classroom teacher. It should be because they learn from someone like you, standing in front of the classroom, sharing your story, talking about how parents want to be heard and sharing about your experience. And it just like gives them something to understand about why this work is important. And then they would be able to have the space to say, Luva, but I'm scared. Like, what if I have to say something that's a problem or something negative, or I'm nervous that they're going to see me as this young person who doesn't know anything. And I think there's a way that, you could reassure them and say, well, maybe you should tell me something affirming about my child. Maybe the first time you talk to me shouldn't be the time when you tell me what they messed up, right? And yeah, it makes sense for you to be fearful and to have anxiety about talking with families. I have that too when it comes to talking with teachers. And so I feel like we need to promote those conversations, and people like you have to like really be at the center of encouraging those conversations to happen.
Yeah.
I want to just, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that is very true. Because I had that experience, with my son a couple of years ago when he was a kindergartner, and that a teacher came to our home to assess his file and all this other stuff. And it was when she came into our home and learned about where we came from and how we got to Rochester and our background and how we parent. It says she built that trust with us. Like it made us as parents feel so comfortable that she really gave a darn about us, right? And I say that with passion. Like it really was impressive that she sat and had a picnic in our backyard with our child, right? She didn't know him. She was a white woman coming into our home, right? And here it is, me and my husband, we're Black, we're tough, we do tough love, we're like perceived as that probably those crazy parents, like what's wrong with them and whatever. But she trusted the process, right? She was vulnerable, and we were able to be vulnerable with her in that space. And to this day, my son is a junior in college, and we're like good friends with her. And she still is engaged in our family because she had all of our children in her first grade class, and she's still a part of the formula for the success of our children.
That's beautiful.
It really is beautiful.
I know that we're
1 minute left for Anne.
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly, like a couple of people are throwing this out in the chat, and I think it's really important to say that this goes all the way up. So even if we've got pre-service teachers, we have to think about the faculty and how the folks in higher ed know whether they know how to engage, whether they have been trained in those kinds of ways. We have to think about the leadership. What are the conditions that are being created in their schools and districts? How are they supporting teachers and doing that kind of work? How are they able to do that themselves? How are we preparing leaders as well? And who are the faculty who are preparing leaders? So, you know, there's a couple of my students on the call right now too. We have a special interest group within our EDD program, and I'm co-teaching it with a parent leader, and they're all going to have parent leaders as thought partners. So really trying to push and recognize that this goes kind of like all the way up as well, and those of us who do this work are implicated in the preparation ourselves, but then also as we think about preparing other folks to prepare educators.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. And so I'm going to turn it back to Tracie, who is, so she won't be mad at me. We're going over.
No, oh, that was such a fast 60 minutes. I feel like there's so much more to talk about, but thank you so much to Anne, Luva, Soo, and Rhoda for sharing these amazing insights. And thanks to everyone who attended and also posted such great questions as well. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to more of them. Definitely be on the lookout for conference follow-up information and resources. And we do have one other panel that's going to be amazing tonight on culturally responsive leadership. That's at 7 p.m. So we put the link in the chat as well. So registration's still open if folks want to sign up for that. But can't thank you enough. Rockstar panel. This was really amazing. We appreciate your time.